So both Hannah Hughes and Andrea Wright have specifically talked about Flatland as one of the inspirations for their work. So I thought it would be interesting to ask them about how the novel has fed into what they've made for this show. Perhaps I'll start with Hannah. Can you say something about how Flatland has specifically informed these works?
Yeah, well, I mean, mainly I read the book when I was really interested in thinking about works that operated between 2 and 3 dimensions, and particularly when I was originally painting and sort of thinking about surface, and then how surface and volume could shift perhaps between sort of abstract and figurative styles of painting. So I was kind of like interested in those spaces where 2 and 3 dimensions kind of collide. I read the book Flatland, and obviously it's so fascinating. That's exactly, it's talking about that idea of like how do we perceive the idea of dimensionality, and like what is the possibility of like a 4th dimension? Can we, something that we can't perceive, something that we can't actually visualize? And when the square, who's the narrator of the book, is trying to sort of think about that sort of possibility of like a mathematical possibility of like a further dimension. He's trying to draw it, but he has no language for that drawing. And I was really interested in, how do you create images in which that sort of slippage between one thing and another, like perhaps being able to see something other than what's there, like feeling as though the images are really ambiguous, or they shift between one state and another. That's really where I'm operating and what I'm interested in.
So in the novel, as I remember it, the one-dimensional world can't imagine the 2 dimensions, and the 2-dimensional, they can't imagine 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
And kind of by analogy, how could we imagine 4 dimensions is the question that lies behind that.
Yeah, and the square, when he's trying to explain that to a sphere in Spaceland, uses the phrase that we can't see it because we haven't got an eye in our belly, which I really love.
And Andrea, your work uses the shapes in Flatland, and particularly the fact that women are reduced to this needle status, which is a comment on issues of equality in Victorian society, which might still be relevant now, I think. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, so in Flatland, women occupy the most lowly status of all the geometric shapes. And there was just some of the elements that he's speaking satirically, but so there's some of the elements that he spoke about in that book that I felt that there was still some of those conditions, women still living in those conditions today. So with my pieces, I really wanted to bring together the element of the women and the other lowly status shapes, the isosceles, to kind of think about their joining forces and rebelling against this hierarchy and this imposition of this flatness. Because in the book, although the square, the narrator, comes back to Flatland after visiting Spaceland to declare that there is this other dimension, and he's sent to prison for blasphemy, effectively. We do get the feeling in the book that other people have been to Spaceland, and that the priests and the judges and the people who are held in high esteem within Flatland know that there is a 3rd dimension, and they deliberately quash any discussion about it to make sure that there isn't any sort of disturbance or any sort of breach to the piece.
Something I wondered reading it was whether if Edwin A. Abbott were alive today, what sort of things might he be pointing out between different dimensionalities? And the obvious thought is that there might be a view on whether the internet and the virtual world is flat in some way, in contrast to the real world. Is there anything you think you'd read into that relates to your work as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in how sort of like new technologies, and particularly AI, can be used in art right now, in particular relation to like how we read and understand and recognise images. For example, like most of the images that we that are read on the internet, or the things that we do in our lives have been like affected in some way by AI, which is about machines recognizing shapes and images, by various means. So I'm very interested, and I have been working with sort of like trying to animate these collages in a way using sort of like computer software that's like made to work in 2 dimensions, that then is kind of like forced into a 3D realm, and like what happens in that when a computer tries to read a 2-dimensional images in 3 dimensions. And a project that I'm kind of like currently starting now with a developer is thinking about how we can use AI engines to actually to make how could a computer like make a Flatland collage. So yeah, I think perhaps that he would be looking there.
I think he would definitely be interested in VR, because in a way VR would be the best way of illustrating this groundbreaking book, this Flatland. I mean, really, entering it, really understanding it. And also, I think VR almost does hint at a fourth dimension, because surely, like Lefebvre said and other writers, this sense of a fourth dimension is actually sort of intangible. It is what lies in our imagination. It's those intangible things that lie between, like in Japanese philosophy, if we look at the philosophy of Ma, these pauses, gaps, these moments where we feel them, we know them almost soulfully, but they're so hard to describe. So I do think he'd be quite interested in that sense of VR, and this sense of being able to connect, perhaps through our imaginations, to this fourth dimension, potentially.